October 20th, 1944, the American invasion fleet appeared off the coast of Leyte Island in the Philippines just after dawn. That afternoon, General Douglas MacArthur waited a short red beach and made his famous broadcast, "I have returned." Within hours, American forces had captured Tacloban Airstrip. The runway was badly damaged, but engineers went to work immediately. By October 27, P-38 Lightning fighters were landing on 2,500 feet of Marston matting. The airstrip was operational. Now it had to be defended. The 211th Antiaircraft Artillery Automatic Weapons Battalion arrived at Tacloban on October 23, 1944. The unit had a distinguished history. Originally formed as the 2nd Battalion of the 208th Coast Artillery Regiment, a Connecticut National Guard unit, it had been called to federal service on January 6, 1941. The battalion trained at Camp Edwards in Massachusetts. On February 18, 1942, the unit departed San Francisco aboard the USS Metsonia bound for the Pacific. They arrived in Brisbane, Australia on March 9, 1942. For 30 months, the 211th defended rear area installation across the southwest Pacific, Australia, New Guinea, the Dutch East Indies. The battalion saw limited combat, but gained extensive experience with its weapons. When the unit arrived at Leyte, it was equipped with some of the most advanced anti-aircraft systems in the American arsenal. M16 multiple gun motor carriages, self-propelled half-tracks mounting the Maxson M45 Quadmount. The M45 was a remarkable weapon system. 4 Browning M2 HP 50 caliber heavy machine guns arranged in a square on an electrically powered turret. Each gun fed from a 200-round ammunition box mounted directly on the weapon. Total capacity 800 rounds. The turret could traverse a full 360 degree. It could elevate from 10 degree to plus 90 degree. Electric motors allowed smooth tracking at up to 60 degrees per second. Combined rate of fire, approximately 2,200 rounds per minute, 37 rounds every second. The system had been developed by the W.L. Maxson Corporation of New York in 1943 as an upgrade to the earlier M33 twin mount. The M45 entered production that same year. It was specifically designed to counter low-flying aircraft. German Luftwaffe fighters and Japanese attack aircraft often approached at low altitude to avoid radar detection. The M45 could track and engage these fast-moving targets with devastating effectiveness. Its high rate of fire compensated for the difficulty of hitting aircraft traveling at 300 miles per hour or more. The M16 half-track that carried the M45 was built by the White Motor Company in Cleveland, Ohio. Production began in May 1943 and continued through March 1944. Total production 2,877 vehicles. An additional 677 were converted from earlier M13 models. The vehicle was based on the M3 personnel carrier chassis. It weighed approximately 19,800 lb fully loaded. Top speed 42 miles per hour on roads. Range 175 miles. Standard crew 3 men, driver, assistant driver, and gunner. The 211th arrived at Tacloban expecting to defend the airstrip against Japanese air attack. That mission lasted less than 1 day. American carrier aircraft and Army Air Force fighters had established complete air superiority over Lee. Japanese air attacks were infrequent and mostly ineffective. By October 24, conventional Japanese air raids had essentially ceased in the Tacloban sector. The Imperial Japanese forces had lost too many aircraft. They could not contest American control of the skies. So the anti-aircraft units found themselves with powerful weapon systems and no targets. The M16 half-tracks sat in defensive positions around the airstrip perimeter while their crews waited for enemy aircraft that never came. Meanwhile, infantry units securing the perimeter faced a different problem. Japanese soldiers were firing from concealed positions in the dense jungle surrounding the airstrip. American troops were taking casualties from an enemy they could not see and could not effectively engage. The problem was not new. It had plagued American forces throughout the Pacific War. Japanese infantry doctrine emphasized defensive fighting from prepared positions with maximum use of terrain and concealment. In jungle environments, that often meant using the vertical dimension. A soldier positioned 20 or 30 feet up in a dense tree canopy was nearly invisible. He could observe American movements, direct mortar fire, or shoot at targets of opportunity. American riflemen firing upward into thick foliage rarely hit anything. The Japanese soldier could see them, but they could not see him. The psychological impact was significant. American soldiers hesitated to move through areas where they might be observed from above. They wasted ammunition, shooting blindly into trees. They called in artillery and airstrikes on forests that might contain 1 or 2 enemy soldiers. The fear of unseen shooters in the canopy became almost as debilitating as the actual casualties. The reality was more complex than the mythology. Most Japanese soldiers in trees were not trained snipers with specialized equipment. They were infantry using elevated positions for observation and harassing fire. A Marine Corps historical study later noted that the belief in widespread tree snipers was seldom supported by facts. Japanese riflemen were not especially equipped for sniping, nor did they usually climb trees to shoot. The practice existed, but its prevalence was greatly exaggerated by American troops. Nevertheless, the threat was real enough. Even mediocre accuracy from an unseen position could wound or kill. Even if shots missed, they forced American soldiers to take cover and slowed advances. Japanese soldiers did use trees when tactical situations demanded it. Some tied themselves to branches to prevent falling of wounded. This was not universal practice, but it occurred frequently enough to be documented in multiple after-action reports. American commanders had tried various solutions. Infantry would spray sections of forest with rifle and machine gun fire. This was largely ineffective. The Japanese were too well concealed and foliage absorbed most bullets. Flamethrowers could clear small areas, but had limited range and required dangerous close approaches. Artillery could destroy forests, but required careful fire direction and risked friendly casualties near the perimeter. Aircraft could stray for bomb-suspected positions, but this was expensive and close air support was not always available. At Tacloban in late October 1944, someone realized that the solution was already in position. The M16 half-tracks with their quad 50 mounts were sitting idle around the airstrip perimeter. They had been designed to shoot down aircraft, but there were no aircraft to shoot. The weapons could traverse, elevate, and deliver concentrated fire at any point within range, and trees, unlike aircraft, did not move. The 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun was one of the most powerful weapons in the American infantry arsenal. Muzzle velocity 2,900 feet per second. Muzzle energy approximately 13,000 foot lb. A single round could penetrate 1 inch of armor plate at 500 yards. It could punch through concrete blocks. It could disable vehicle engines. 4 guns firing together delivered that destructive power 37 times every second. What it could do to wood was devastating. The first documented use of the M45 against ground targets at Tacloban occurred in late October 1944. Infantry units reported taking fire from the tree line north of the airstrip. Standard countermeasures had failed. Rifle fire was ineffective against concealed positions in dense canopy. Artillery was too imprecise this close to friendly lines. Someone suggested using the anti-aircraft guns. The technique was straightforward. When infantry reported fire from a specific sector of tree line, an M16 would traverse to that bearing and fire a sustained burst. The gunner aimed at tree trunk level roughly 20 to 40 feet above ground. All 450 caliber guns fired together. 5 to 10 seconds of fire delivered between 150 and 350 rounds on target. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Trees disintegrated. Hardwoods 18 to 24 in diameter were cut through at trunk level. Branches exploded into splinters. Anything concealed in the canopy either fell or was hit by flying debris. Japanese soldiers who had felt safe in elevated positions discovered those positions were suddenly untenable. American soldiers gave the M45 Quadmount several nicknames. Meat chopper was most common, earned during early use against German infantry in Europe. In the Pacific, some units called it the Krut Mao, a name that transferred from the European theater. Others simply called it the Quad 50 or the Quad. But regardless of nickname, the weapon's effectiveness was undeniable. A sustained burst from 450 caliber machine guns firing together could destroy any cover short of reinforced concrete. The sound was distinctive, not the sharp crack of a rifle or the rapid chatter of a single machine gun, but a deep, sustained roar. Soldiers described it as sounding like heavy canvas being torn apart. The noise could be heard for miles. Japanese troops learned to recognize it. When they heard that sound, anyone in the trees nearby was about to die. The tactic spread quickly through informal channels. Infantry units working with the 211th Ad Area Battalion at Tacloban saw the results and requested similar support when operating in forested areas. Word passed to other infantry divisions on Leyte. Those divisions asked if anti-aircraft units were available. When 88-day battalions arrived to defend other positions, infantry commanders immediately requested they provide support against tree positions. Other anti-aircraft units learned about the technique and adopted it. The 209th EEW Battalion, which operated near Manila starting in February 1945, used the same method. A photograph dated February 5, 1945 shows Battery A of the 209th with their M16 Halftrack and crew at Manila. The caption notes, "The vehicle was used for both anti-aircraft defense and ground support." By late 1944, the practice had become standard procedure throughout American anti-aircraft units in the Philippines. The Japanese response was immediate after action reports from Japanese units specifically mentioned American use of heavy automatic weapons against tree positions. One report from the 16th Division recovered after the war noted that positions previously considered safe, such as elevated observation posts, had become extremely dangerous. The report described American automatic weapons with rates of fire exceeding 1,000 rounds per minute based on observed tracer density. Japanese infantry commanders adapted their tactics. They stopped using trees for sustained firing positions. Soldiers who needed elevated observation would climb quickly, observe, then descend immediately. The practice of tying oneself to a tree to prevent falling if wounded was largely abandoned. Being tied to a tree that was being cut apart by 50 caliber fire meant certain death. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was significant. For 2 years, Japanese infantry had used jungle canopy as a defensive advantage. Now that advantage was being systematically eliminated. American forces had found a counter that was simple, effective, and terrifying. Japanese soldiers, who heard the distinctive roar of Quad 50s, learned to avoid elevated positions entirely when that sound was nearby. American infantry appreciated the support. Soldiers who had been frustrated by unseen fire from the tree and now had an effective solution. If they took fire from elevated positions, they could request Quad 50 support. The M16s were mobile enough to respond rapidly. Once in position, they could engage in seconds. The boost to American morale was substantial. Troops no longer felt helpless against tree positions. The effectiveness of the tactic was reflected in operational reports. The 211th AAA Battalion's primary mission at Tacloban remained air defense, and they excelled at it. The battalion was officially credited with 40.75 enemy aircraft, destroyed in 26. Probably destroyed during the Philippine campaign. This made them the top-scoring anti-aircraft unit in the Philippines. But their after-action reports also documented extensive employment against ground targets. Units operating with Quad 50 support reported fewer casualties from elevated fire than units without such support. Japanese forces attempted to adapt. Some units tried to use the Quad 50 response against American positions by waiting for the guns to fire, then maneuvering against positions that had revealed themselves. This rarely worked. The M16s were armored and could withstand rifle fire. They were mobile and could relocate after engaging. They usually had infantry support nearby. Attempting to assault an M16 position across open ground was suicidal. Other Japanese units tried to attack the M16s directly before they could engage tree positions. This also failed. The M45 could depress to -10 degrees and traverse 360 degrees. It was highly effective for ground defense. Any infantry attempting to assault across open ground would be caught by the same concentrated fire that destroyed trees. Multiple documented Japanese attacks on M16 positions were defeated with heavy casualties. By January 1945, when American forces landed at Lingayen Gulf on Luzon, the use of M16 half-tracks against ground targets had become standard operating procedure. Anti-aircraft battalions were routinely assigned to support infantry units clearing forested areas. The mission was understood: provide air defense when needed, provide ground support when air defense was not required. The Luzon campaign represented the largest land operation in the Pacific War. General Walter Kruger's 6th Army landed over 200,000 troops against Japanese defenses commanded by General Tomoyuki Yamashita. Yamashita had approximately 250,000 troops on Luzon, but faced impossible odds. American naval and air superiority was complete. Japanese supply lines had been severed. The Imperial Japanese forces could not reinforce or resupply their Philippines garrison. Yamashita understood he could not win. His strategy was to delay American forces as long as possible, tying down troops that might otherwise be used against Japan itself. To accomplish this, Yamashita divided his forces into 3 groups positioned in defensible terrain. The Shobu Group, numbering approximately 152,000 men and commanded by Yamashita personally, defended northern Luzon from mountain position. The Shimu Group with 80,000 men defended the mountains east and southeast of Manila. The Kembo Group with 30,000 men defended Clark Field in the western mountains. Each group was expected to fight from prepared positions using terrain to maximum advantage. American forces attacking these positions needed every available source of firepower. Infantry advancing through jungle-covered mountains faced Japanese soldiers fighting from caves, bunkers, and concealed positions. Artillery provided crucial support but could not reach all targets. Airstrikes helped, but were weather-dependent and required careful coordination to avoid hitting friendly forces. Direct fire support from tanks and tank destroyers was valuable, but vehicles could not always reach mountainous terrain. Anti-aircraft units with M45 Quadmounts provided MOBA, responsive fire support that could reach positions other weapons could not effectively engage. The M16s could traverse rough terrain that stopped heavier vehicles. They could set up quickly and engage targets within seconds. They could deliver concentrated fire that destroyed cover and suppressed enemy positions. This made them valuable assets for infantry commanders dealing with Japanese defensive tactics. The United States Army's official history of the Philippine campaign triumph in the Philippines specifically documented this tactical evolution. The history noted extensive and effective employment of anti-aircraft artillery, both 90mm guns and automatic weapons against ground targets. This was not presented as an innovation or departure from doctrine, but as a natural adaptation of available firepower to meet battlefield requirements. The technique was particularly valuable during operations in northern Luzon. 1st Corps, tasked with defeating Japanese forces in the mountainous jungle terrain of the Cordillera Central, relied heavily on fire support from all available weapons. Japanese General Tomoyuki Yamashita had positioned the Shobu Group numbering approximately 152,000 troops in defensive positions throughout the northern mountains. His strategy was attrition tie down American forces for as long as possible using terrain and prepared defenses. American forces attacking into these mountain positions faced Japanese soldiers fighting from caves, bunkers, and elevated positions in dense jungle. Artillery and air support helped but could not reach all positions. Infantry needed direct fire support that could destroy a specific target. Anti-aircraft units with M45s provided that support. The Quad 50s were used against cave entrances, fortified positions, tree concentrations, and any location where Japanese forces might be concealed. The tactic was not limited to the Philippines. As American forces moved toward Japan, the practice followed. On Okinawa, in April and May 1945, M16s were again used extensively for ground support. The terrain on Okinawa was more open than the Philippine jungles, making tree positions less relevant, but the basic principle remained. Concentrated 50 caliber fire could destroy cover and eliminate concealed enemy positions. The M45 continued in this dual role for the remainder of the war. Air defense remained its primary mission. When the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte on January 1, 1945, a massive attack on Allied airfields in France and the Low Countries, American anti-aircraft units, including those with M45s, engaged enemy aircraft with considerable success. At the Ryan Crossing in March 1945, anti-aircraft artillery shot down approximately 30% of attacking German aircraft. The weapon proved its value in its designed role, but the ground support mission had become equally important. In both the European and Pacific theaters, M45s spent as much or more time engaging ground targets as air targets. This reflected the shifting nature of the air war. By early 1945, Both Germany and Japan had lost the ability to conduct sustained air operations. Allied air superiority was nearly complete. Anti-aircraft weapons remained necessary to deter and destroy the occasional attack, but opportunities for air-to-air engagement were increasingly rare. The American military establishment eventually acknowledged this tactical evolution formally. In March 1945, the Army Ground Forces issued a tactical bulletin describing the use of M45 Quadmounts against fortified positions. The bulletin noted that these weapons had been employed effectively against enemy personnel and trees in the Southwest Pacific area. It recommended that anti-aircraft units be prepared to provide support to infantry against ground targets when air threat was minimal. This represented official recognition of what had been common practice for months. The bulletin did not specify where the tactic originated or who had developed it. It presented the information as general guidance based on field experience. This was typical of military documentation. Innovations developed by soldiers in combat were rarely attributed to specific individuals or units. Tactics emerged, proved effective, spread through informal channels, and eventually became part of formal doctrine without acknowledgement of origins. The 211th Battalion continued operating in the Philippines through the end of hostilities. The unit participated in operations on Leyte and Luzon, earning campaign participation credit for the Southern Philippines and Luzon campaigns. One soldier from the battalion, Milas Ray Benfield from North Carolina, received the Asiatic Pacific Theater Campaign Medal, with 5 bronze service stars for Papua New Guinea, East Indies, Southern Philippines, and the Luzon campaign. He also received the Distinguished Unit Badge and Purple Heart. He was discharged from the battalion, Battery D, on July 23, 1945. After the Japanese surrender in August 1945, American forces began returning home. Anti-aircraft units, having seen limited action in their primary role during the final months of the war, were among the first to be deactivated. Many battalions were disbanded within months of the surrender. Records suggest the 211th A8AW Battalion was likely deactivated in late 1945, though the exact date is not documented in readily available sources. The M45 Quadmount, however, continued in American service well beyond World War II. The weapon system proved its value in multiple roles and remained in the inventory for decades. The M45 Quadmount, however, continued in American service well beyond World War II. The weapon system proved its value in multiple roles and remained in the inventory for decades. The operational employment of the M45 required significant logistical support. Each gun fired at approximately 500 rounds per minute. With 4 guns firing together, a 10-second burst consumed over 300 rounds. The 800-round basic load lasted less than 4 minutes of sustained fire. This meant M16 crews needed constant resupply to remain effective. Ammunition consumption rates during active operations could reach several thousand rounds per day per vehicle. The 50 caliber ammunition itself was substantial. Each round weighed approximately 4 ounces. An 800-round load weighed approximately 200 lb. The ammunition was belt-fed with belts loaded into 200-round boxes. Each box weighed approximately 50 lb when full. Reloading all 4 guns required handling 4 boxes totaling 200 lb of ammunition. This was a two-man job under combat conditions. American logistical systems could handle these requirements because they were designed for scale. Supply ships brought ammunition forward to advanced bases. Smaller vessels and landing craft moved to beach dumps. Trucks carried it to forward supply points. From there, unit vehicles picked up ammunition and delivered it to gun positions. The system moved millions of rounds of 50 caliber ammunition across thousands of miles of ocean and hundreds of miles of jungle terrain. The M16's mobility was crucial to its effectiveness. The half-track design combined wheels at the front with tracks at the rear. This provided better cross-country performance than wheeled vehicles while being faster and lighter than fully tracked vehicles. The M16 could travel on roads at 42 miles per hour, allowing rapid repositioning. Off-road, it could traverse terrain that would stop most wheeled vehicles. The track system distributed weight effectively, reducing ground pressure, allowing movement through soft soil and mud that would bog down trucks. The vehicle's range of 175 miles was adequate for tactical repositioning but required refueling for extended operation. The M16 used gasoline, which was readily available through American supply systems, but presented fire hazards. The fuel tank held 60 gall. Fuel consumption varied with terrain and speed but averaged roughly 8 meters per gallon. This meant the practical operational radius was approximately 50 to 60 meters before refueling became necessary. Crew comfort was minimal. The M16 was an open-topped vehicle. The gunner sat in an armored tub surrounded by ammunition boxes and gun mounts. The driver and assistant driver sat forward in the cab. There was minimal protection from weather. Rain, heat, and insects were constant problems in the Pacific. The vehicle provided no sleeping accommodation. Crews lived in tents or other field shelters when not operating the vehicle. Maintenance requirements were significant. The M2 Browning machine gun was reliable, but required regular cleaning and inspection. The .50 caliber cartridge generated substantial heat and pressure. Carbon buildup in the barrel and gas system required daily cleaning. The electric motors that powered trailers and elevation required periodic inspection and lubrication. The half-track suspension, particularly the track system, required frequent maintenance. Track tension had to be adjusted regularly. Road wheels and bogies needed lubrication. The engine required oil changes every few hundred miles. Crew training took several weeks. Gunners needed to learn traverse and elevation controls, rate of fire management, barrel changing procedures, and ammunition loading. Drivers needed to learn both wheeled and tracked vehicle operation. Assistant drivers learned vehicle maintenance, radio operation, and served as loaders during firing. The three-man crew had to function as a team under combat conditions. This required practice and coordination. During the Korean War, the M45 saw extensive combat. The weapon had been designed for a different kind of warfare, one dominated by propeller-driven aircraft, flying at modest speeds and altitudes. By 1950, jet aircraft had changed the SEAL nature of air combat. The North Korean and Chinese Air Forces operated Soviet-built MG-15 fighter, capable of speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour at high altitude. The M45 was essentially useless against such targets. But the Korean War quickly became a ground war. Chinese and North Korean infantry attacks came in mass waves, often at night. They used terrain and concealment expertly. American forces needed weapons that could deliver massive firepower quickly against ground targets. The M45 excelled at this mission. M16s and M55 trailer-mounted versions were deployed throughout Korea for base defense and convoy escort. They proved highly effective against infantry assaults. In 1954, recognizing the changing nature of the threat, the Army converted approximately 700 Mir-16 half-tracks to the M16A2 configuration. This involved adding or modifying armor protection and ensuring the vehicle could mount the latest M45°F model turret. The conversion indicated the Army's intent to keep the system in service despite its obsolescence as an anti-aircraft weapon. The M45's final major combat deployment came in Vietnam. By the 1960s, the weapon was completely obsolete for air defense. Modern jet aircraft flew too fast and too high for manually aimed .50 caliber machine guns to engage effectively. But Vietnam, like Korea, was primarily a ground war. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army used ambush and infiltration tactics. American forces needed weapons for convoy security and base defense. M45 turrets were mounted on M35 2.5-ton truck and M54 5-ton trucks, creating improvised gun trucks. These vehicles provided firepower for convoy escort along vulnerable roads. When convoys were ambushed, the Quad 50s could deliver suppressive fire that overwhelmed attackers. Several documented instances showed single gun trucks defeating company-sized ambushes through sheer volume of fire. The M45 remained in American military service until the 1970s, when it was finally replaced by more modern systems. The weapon had been designed in 1943 for a specific threat: low-flying propeller aircraft. By the 1970s, that threat no longer existed. Surface-to-air missiles and radar-directed guns had made the manually aimed machine gun obsolete for air defense. But the M45 had proven remarkably adaptable. A weapon system designed for one purpose had found utility in multiple roles. Across 3 different wars, the total number of M45 systems produced is uncertain. The Maxson Corporation and its licenses manufactured thousands of units during World War II. White Motor Company built 2,877 M16 half-tracks. Additional systems were produced as trailer-mounted M55 units. Some sources estimate total production at approximately 10,000 Mir-45 turrets. though this figure is difficult to verify from available records. The weapon was exported to multiple countries through Lend-Lease and post-war military assistance programs. The Soviet Union received some M17 half-tracks which were M45s mounted on M5 chassis. The French Army used M45s extensively in Indochina and Algeria, mounting them on trucks for convoy security. The Israeli Defense Forces modified the M45 design, replacing the 450 caliber machine guns with two 20mm Hispanosa HS 4000 and 4 cannons. This version, designated TCM-20, served through the 1980s. The tactical innovation of using the M45 against ground targets, particularly against tree positions, was never formally credited to any individual or unit. The practice emerged organically across multiple theaters in response to battlefield conditions. In Europe, American units used Quad 50s against German infantry during the Battle of the Bulge and subsequent operations. In the Pacific, units used them against Japanese positions and trees and fortifications. The technique spread through informal communication between units and eventually became part of standard doctrine without official acknowledgement of origin. This pattern is typical of military innovation during wartime. Soldiers face problems, find solutions using available tools, share those solutions through informal networks, and effective practices spread. Official doctrine eventually catches up, codifying what has already become common practice. The individual or unit that first applied a technique is often forgotten or never recorded. The innovation becomes part of the collective knowledge base without attribution. The M45 Quadmount earned its place in military history through effectiveness rather than technological sophistication. It was not an advanced weapon system. 4 machine guns on a powered mount was conceptually simple. The individual M2 Browning machine gun, designed by John Browning in the years following World War I, was itself a relatively mature technology by World War II. The innovation was in the integration, combining 4 guns with a power turret, adequate ammunition capacity and mobility on a half-track chassis. What made the system valuable was its versatility. Designed for anti-aircraft work, it proved equally effective against ground targets light enough to be mobile, powerful enough to destroy most field fortifications, simple enough to be operated by a crew with limited training, reliable enough to function in harsh conditions from European winters to Pacific jungles. Not sophisticated but functional. The psychological impact of the weapon was as important as its physical effects. The sound of a Quad 50 firing was distinctive and terrifying. Soldiers on both sides learned to recognize it. For American troops, it meant powerful support was available. For enemy troops, it meant any position within range could be destroyed in seconds. That psychological effect shaped tactical decisions. Japanese soldiers abandoned tree positions not just because they were being killed, but because the presence of Quad 50s made those positions psychologically untenable. The broader question raised by the M45 story is how innovation actually occurs in military organizations. The standard narrative suggests innovation comes from research and development, laboratories for engineering studies, and formal testing programs. New technologies are invented, refined, tested, and then deployed to troops who employ them according to official doctrine. This top-down model describes some innovations but misses many others. The use of anti-aircraft guns against ground targets was not invented by engineers or prescribed by doctrine. It emerged from practical necessity. Units had weapons capable of engaging ground targets. Those targets needed to be engaged. The weapons were used. The practice spread because it worked, not because it was officially approved. Doctrine eventually acknowledged what troops had been doing for months. This bottom-up innovation is common in warfare, but rarely documented. After-action reports mention using anti-aircraft weapons against ground targets, but do not usually explain how the practice started or who first applied it. Official histories note that it happened, but treat it as an obvious adaptation rather than a significant innovation. The individuals involved are not named because there are too many of them spread across too many units. The result is that military history tends to emphasize technological innovation, the development of new weapons and systems, while underemphasizing tactical innovation, the creative use of existing systems in new ways. Both types of innovation matter. The development of radar and proximity fuses were crucial technological advances, but so was the recognition that anti-aircraft guns could cut down trees. The M45 Quadmount story illustrates another aspect of military effectiveness, the importance of multi-role capability. Systems designed for one purpose that can effectively perform other missions provide operational flexibility. A unit equipped only with specialized anti-aircraft weapons would have been marginally useful once air superiority was established. A unit equipped with weapons that could engage both air and ground targets remained valuable throughout the campaign. This flexibility meant anti-aircraft units continued to contribute to mission success, even when their primary mission rarely materialized. Modern military planners recognize this principle. Contemporary weapon systems are increasingly designed for multiple roles from the outset. Fighter aircraft are expected to perform both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. Armored vehicles are equipped to engage both ground targets and aircraft. Naval vessels carry weapons effective against surface ships, aircraft, and land targets. The M45 was not designed with this flexibility in mind, but demonstrated its value accidentally. The veterans of the 211th Day Adal Battalion who served at Tacloban returned to the United States after the war and resumed civilian lives. Most did not talk extensively about their service. For many veterans, the war was something to be remembered but not dwelt upon. They had done their duty, survived, and come home. That was enough. One veteran, Harry Funk, served as a corporal on a Quad 50 with the battalion. According to family testimony, he was highly decorated, receiving a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and 2 Purple Hearts. His military records were destroyed in the 1973 fire at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, which eliminated approximately 80% of Army personnel records from World War II. This makes it impossible to independently verify many details individual service. What is documented is that Funk served with the 211th at Leyte, operated a Quadmount, and survived the war. The broader historical record of the 211th is clear. The battalion served with distinction throughout the Pacific War. Their 40.75 confirmed aircraft destroyed and 26 probable made them the top-scoring anti-aircraft unit in the Philippine campaign. They provided both air defense and ground support to infantry operations across multiple islands. They adapted their tactics and weapons to meet battlefield requirements. They contributed to American victory in the Pacific. Individual stories are harder to document. Military records focus on units and operations, not on specific soldiers unless those soldiers achieved notable distinction or commanded significant forces. The soldier who first decided to fire a Quad 50 at a tree is not recorded. The officer who first authorized such use is not named. The specific date when the practice began is not documented with precision. We know what happened at Tacloban in late October 1944. We know it spread rapidly. We know it became standard practice. But the human details are lost. This is the nature of military history. We can document what happened to units, operations, campaigns. We can verify statistics about aircraft destroyed, positions taken, casualties suffered. We can track the movement of divisions and the outcomes of battles. But the individual experiences of ordinary soldiers, the specific moments when someone made a decision that changed how warfare was conducted, those details often disappear. They were not considered important enough to record at the time. Years later, they cannot be reconstructed. What we can say with certainty is that American forces in the Philippines in late 1944 faced a tactical problem. Japanese soldiers were using elevated positions and trees to observe and harass American units. Standard countermeasures were ineffective. Someone recognized that anti-aircraft weapons could solve this problem. The practice was tried, proved effective, and spread. Within weeks, it had become standard procedure. Within months, it was part of formal doctrine. By the end of the war, it was considered an obvious application of available firepower. That process, the recognition of a problem, the identification of a solution using existing tools, the rapid spread of an effective practice, and its eventual codification as doctrine, represents how military organizations adapt to battlefield conditions, not through formal innovation programs or top-down directives, but through the accumulated experience of soldiers finding ways to accomplish their missions with the resources available. The M45 Quadmount was not a war-winning weapon. No single weapon system wins wars. Wars are won through the combined effects of industrial capacity, strategic planning, tactical execution, logistics, training, morale, and leadership. The M45 was one small piece of a much larger effort, but it was an effective piece. It performed its design mission well and adapted to missions its designers had not anticipated. The weapon's legacy is visible in modern military thinking about firepower and flexibility. Contemporary doctrine emphasizes the importance of systems that can perform multiple roles. An aircraft that can only engage other aircraft is less valuable than one that can engage both aircraft and ground targets. A missile system that can only engage one type of threat is less valuable than one with broader capabilities. The M45 demonstrated this principle decades before it became formal doctrine. The tactical innovation of using anti-aircraft weapons against ground targets, particularly against positions in trees, represents a type of military adaptation that occurs constantly, but is rarely documented or celebrated. It lacks the drama of technological breakthrough. There was no eureka moment, no brilliant inventor, no dramatic test that proved the concept. There was only the gradual recognition among multiple units that a weapon, designed for one purpose, could be effectively employed for another. This kind of innovation is essential to military effectiveness, but difficult to study or replicate. It emerges from the experience and judgment of soldiers facing actual combat conditions. It cannot be planned in peacetime or prescribed by doctrine. It happens when people with practical problems and available tools recognize connections that were not obvious to the system's designers. A tree is not an aircraft, but both are elevated targets that can be destroyed by concentrated fire. The story of the M45 in the Pacific demonstrates the importance of allowing tactical flexibility at the unit level. If American anti-aircraft units had been rigidly restricted to air defense missions only, a valuable resource would have sat unused while infantry struggled with a problem those units could have solved. Instead, commanders at battalion and battery level were allowed to employ their weapons as battlefield conditions required. This flexibility meant weapon systems remained useful even when their primary mission rarely materialized. Modern military organizations continue to struggle with this balance. Doctrine provides necessary structure and ensures units can operate effectively as part of larger forces. But overly rigid doctrine can prevent adaptation to unexpected conditions. The ideal is doctrine flexible enough to accommodate innovation while structured enough to maintain coordination and effectiveness. The World War II American military, despite its reputation for logistical and industrial strength, was also remarkably flexible in tactical employment. Units adapted weapons and tactics to meet local conditions without waiting for official approval. The human cost of warfare is reflected in stories like the M45 Quadmount. The weapon existed because aircraft were killing soldiers and needed to be shot down. The tactic of using it against ground targets emerged because soldiers were being killed from positions standard weapons could not effectively engage. Every technical discussion of muzzle velocity and rate of fire exists in the context of people trying to kill each other. The dry language of military documentation that the statistics about aircraft destroyed and targets engaged represents individual acts of violence and individual human deaths. The American soldiers who operated Quad 50s at Tacloban and throughout the Pacific were mostly young men in their early 20s. Many had been civilians just months or years earlier. They were taught to operate complex weapon systems, sent to the other side of the world and expected to fight an enemy they had never seen in environments completely foreign to their experience. Most performed their duties competently. Some performed exceptionally. They adapted to circumstances, solved problems with available resources, and contributed to eventual victory. The Japanese soldiers they fought were equally young, equally far from home, equally committed to their mission. The asymmetry of firepower was profound. American forces had access to industrial production that Japan could not match. They had logistical systems that kept them supplied even in remote jungle locations. They had weapons like the M45 that delivered concentrated firepower Japanese forces could not counter. But individual Japanese soldiers were often highly motivated, well-trained, and tactically skilled within the constraints of their situation. The use of Quad 50s against tree positions changed the tactical balance in jungle fighting, but did not eliminate Japanese resistance. Japanese forces continued to fight effectively throughout the Philippines campaign, using tactics that emphasized terrain, concealment, and defensive preparation. American victory came through sustained pressure across multiple dimensions: firepower, mobility, logistics, air superiority, and naval support. The M45 was one tool among many. After the war, most American veterans returned home and resumed civilian lives. The weapons they had used were either scrapped or stored for potential future use. The M45 went into storage along with thousands of other weapon systems. When the Korean War began in 1950, these weapons were pulled out of storage, refurbished, and sent back into combat. The same thing happened during Vietnam. A weapon designed in 1943 was still in combat in 1970. This longevity reflects both the quality of the basic design and the continued relevance of the mission. Infantry needed fire support. Convoys needed protection. Bases needed defense against ground attack. The M45 could provide all of these. The fact that it was obsolete for air defense did not matter as long as it remained effective for ground support. Eventually, changing technology and changing threats made the weapon completely obsolete. By the 1970s, the M45 offered no capabilities that could not be provided more effectively by other systems. It was heavy, required significant crew training, consumed ammunition at high rates, and lacked the precision of modern weapons. It was replaced and disappeared from active service. Most surviving examples are now in museums or private collections and artifacts of a different era of warfare. The 211th AEA-AW Battalion's history represents thousands of similar units that served during World War II. Most were not famous. Most did not achieve unique distinctions. They performed their assigned missions, adapted to circumstances, contributed to larger operations, and went home when the war ended. Their collective effort made victory possible, but their individual stories are mostly forgotten. This is not unique to the 211th or to World War. Most military services like this, long periods of routine duty, punctuated by brief periods of intense activity, contributions to large operations when individual efforts are impossible to isolate. Adaptation to circumstances that generates tactical innovations too small to merit formal recognition but collectively important to effectiveness. The accumulated weight of thousands of small innovations, millions of routine tasks performed competently, and the sustained effort of millions of individuals across years of conflict. The M45 Quadmount story, the use of anti-aircraft weapons to cut down trees containing enemy soldiers, is one of countless similar stories. A practical problem, a creative solution, rapid adoption, eventual codification. It mattered to the soldiers who benefited from the support and the soldiers who operated the weapons. It contributed to tactical success in specific battles and campaigns, but it was not decisive. No single tactic is decisive. Victory comes from the accumulation of many small advantages, and the sustained pressure those advantages enable. If there is a lesson in this story, it is that military effectiveness requires both technological capability and tactical flexibility. The most advanced weapons are useless if employed rigidly according to doctrine that does not match battlefield realities. Conversely, tactical creativity cannot compensate for fundamental technological or numerical inferiority. The combination of adequate weapons, flexible employment, and competent soldiers creates effective military forces. The American military in World War II had all three. The M45 Quadmount was a good weapon. American commanders allowed it to be employed flexibly. American soldiers operated it effectively. The result was tactical success in specific situations and contribution to strategic victory in the larger campaign. The legacy of the M45 is not dramatic. It represents competent engineering, practical adaptation, and effective employment. It solved the problems it was designed to solve and proved useful for additional missions its designers had not anticipated. It served for decades across multiple wars and multiple roles. Eventually it became obsolete and was retired. This is the life cycle of most successful weapon systems. Not revolutionary, but effective. Not glamorous, but reliable, good enough to matter when it mattered. That is how most military history actually works. Not through brilliant innovations that change everything, but through steady accumulation of capabilities that collectively enable success. The M45 Quadmount and its use against Japanese positions and trees is one thread in that larger tapestry. Worth remembering, worth understanding, but not more important than it actually was. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these historical accounts. Each one provides insight into how warfare actually functioned and how soldiers actually adapted to circumstances. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from.